This is a podcast by the Straits Times.
Well, I mentioned the area of childcare leave. That could be enhanced. I think that could be just the nudge I need, to consider having a third child or more. So that area would be most important to me.
Oh, wow. Okay, you heard it here first. This is what to do to get people to have their third child. Prime Minister Lawrence Wong delivered his 2025 budget, also hailed as an election budget as Singapore heads to the polls sometime later this year. It was also said to be a budget with something for everyone. Wow. But what's in the budget for me and my peers as we try to navigate adulting, jobs and housing, while also getting enough sleep and aiming to have enough money to live out our 20s and 30s? Hi, I'm Suen Tan, and you're listening to Headstart On Record. In the studio with me is young financial literacy expert from DBS, Shawn Lee, and investment strategy MD, Vasu Menon from OCBC. Welcome to the show. So, assuming I'm 25 in my first job, or I'm 30, I'm looking to start a family, Vasu, what do you think were the top 3 things that PM Lawrence Wong gave to young people like me this budget?
Well, to me, I would say there were 3 groups of things, that caught my attention. The first group would be really, the measures announced by the government to boost the local stock market. Maybe the viewers and yourself, you could be looking for, vouchers and that sort of things. But to me, I think, for young people, they want to focus on things that are long-term, that have longevity in terms of payout. And I think, to me, the kind of measures the government announced, first at the budget and then subsequently details were announced, shows that there's a paradigm shift. There's a change in thinking towards the local equities market. And I think the government recognizes that, the equities market needs to see more life. And they're actually putting money and resources and measures behind it. And, for young families, young individuals, I think it makes sense for them to put your money to harder work. And one way you can put your money to harder work is through the equities market, through investments. I'm not suggesting they throw all your money into equities, but I'm saying that, young people should be thinking of investing because the biggest asset for a young person is the long runway that they have compared to a much older person. And, so I think this set of measure is something, if it plays out eventually over time, is going to produce returns, help wealth to grow, and provide longevity in terms of benefits for young people. So that's the first bucket. The second bucket, of course, are all the vouchers. We're talking about the CDC vouchers. We're talking about the SG60 vouchers. We're talking about the Active SG vouchers. We're talking about the climate vouchers. And then we're also talking about the culture pass, right? All that put together is quite substantial, I felt. I think the third group I would want to talk about would be all those measures that actually benefit the families. And this has been going on for a few years. But in the latest budget, the government actually giving handout in terms of funds being put into the accounts of children from below 12 all the way to 20, right? So from preschoolers to those in primary, secondary school to even junior college, right? And they've given each of these groups $500 each, either through their parents or into their accounts directly. And I think for large families, I think the payouts, the measures announced were very significant. The additional boost is about $16,000 at the least. And that's significant, I feel. So there are 3 aspects. And I think, to me, those are the 3 groups that really mattered.
That's so interesting that you started with the stock market measures, right?
Precisely.
Yeah.
Well, don't forget, I'm also an investment strategist. And to me, I recognize the fact that for a young person, at the end of the day, you got to take ownership of your own finances. And one way you do that is, through making not just saving, but also growing your savings by investing in a prudent, measured way. And, I think the local stock market is going to throw up interesting opportunities. I think the main message I have is that for young individuals, they should really be thinking about not just savings, but also growing their wealth, because that's what's going to produce positive returns for them in all aspects in their life journey over the next, 30, 40, 50 years.
Right. Okay. Because there's so much talk about, the rising cost of living and inflation, right? And
that's right.
I think we talk about vouchers as a way, like a short-term measure to kind of alleviate those burdens. But now you're talking about a longer-term measure.
Precisely. The whole idea behind investing is to beat inflation as well. It's something I feel strongly about. It's been my life journey. I'm in my 60s, and I've been in the investment markets for the last, close to 40 years. And so, I've seen various cycles, and I can tell you that, for those who have invested in the markets, held on for a longer period of time, that's a pretty effective way of beating inflation, growing your wealth, and being able to meet your life goals in over the next, 10, 20, 30 years. And many young people will have a lot of life goals as they progress through life, starting a family, having children, buying their first home. And, while I think some of these grants and help from the government is useful, I think at the end of the day, investing is also quite important.
Right. Okay. And Shawn, yourself as like a young person, right? Are you going to invest more in the local stock market, having heard all these measures?
I've always been investing significantly because I just have a long time horizon. Hence, I do invest quite a big part of my money into equities just because I'm able to take the risk, as well as the long time horizon just allows me to grow my money for a longer period of time and reap the benefits of compound interest.
Okay, and so for you, what were the top 3 budget goodies personally?
Sure. So I'm in my mid-30s, happily married with 2 young children. They're aged 7 and 2 this year. And with 2 young kids, expenses are relatively high for me. And I understand Vasu have 2 primary school going kids as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it was with open arms that I welcomed the announcement from PM Wong that he will be providing more support with families this year. First, there will be $500 in Life SG credits for all children who are aged 12 and below, and they can be used at merchants, so long as they provide the PayNow UEN QR or the NETS QR, and that can go a long way in defraying expenses. And that's quite flexible. And secondly, I was listening, to the Budget Live, where it was done last Tuesday. And when PM Wong announced the large family scheme, I suddenly, opened my ears a little wider, and I really felt PM Wong was speaking to me and encouraging me, go on, have a third kid, and as Vasu had shared, the benefits of the large family scheme is really quite significant. And also with all of this, I did my own calculations. If I were to have a third kid, I will receive, a total $38,000 in cash, $5,000 in my wife's MediSave, another $5,000 in my child's MediSave in the first 6 years of my child's life without putting up a single cent. So that's really significant monetary support. But beyond that, I think, just as a third goodie, one area that is very meaningful for me, it's the match retirement savings scheme that is extended to persons with disability. For every dollar that is topped up to a person with a disabilities special account, and this provided if they're less than basic retirement sum, the government matches another dollar to it. So this dollar matching is wonderful. It will start next year and be rolled out for 5 years.
Yeah, those are all very helpful schemes, right? I think for younger people and also young families like yourself. So as someone with 2 young children, what are your most pressing, cost of living concerns right now?
I have a child who has just started primary 1. I think starting primary 1, you would see the increased intensity of the academic pace that he has to keep up with. Hence, he's also of my older child, so of an age where he can start exploring different skills or different sports. So with this comes increased cost in enrichment. So I would see that's a greatest cost that I've seen increase, especially for families with young children.
And do you feel the pinch as well when it comes to GST increases and inflation, in terms of household groceries or day-to-day expenses?
I do, because even if you buy our regular cup of coffee at the coffee shop, gone are the days you see they go for 90 cents, $1. Now it's at least $1.50 at a coffee shop. If you go to a nicer, cafeteria, they could easily be $3 and upwards. So all this have a pronounced effect in terms of our budget.
And do you worry about things in the future, if things continue to get more expensive? How do you send your kids to university, right, when they reach that age? How do you sustain them all the way until they're 18 and maybe even beyond, right?
Yes, so that's a concern. That's something at the back of our minds. It's something that we have, for me personally, have set a budget every month just to save up for their tertiary education, because that is expected to come up to a sizable sum. It's not just the tuition fees alone, but it's also their living expenses, their materials that they need for their course of studies, for example, laptop or textbooks, those add up.
So at the moment, with all the CDC vouchers and all that help, do you think that's enough for young families like yourself?
I think it's a good move by the government to recognize that families, need more help, and like the measures I've shared do go a long way in terms of supporting them to defray all these expenses.
Okay, and I guess Vasu, for yourself as well, right? Seeing the struggles that different groups of people face, but also young people who maybe they don't have so many years of work, for example, so they do not have that much pay or salary at the moment, but they still have to support young children and young families. For yourself, what do you think was maybe not offered for young people this budget, or what more do you hope to see?
Well, I think the budget was intended in general at, helping to alleviate cost pressures, helping, to position the economy for the long-term future. Of course, it will be helpful if the government could help with greater handouts, for example, greater payouts rather, for young people to help them reduce their costs. As Shawn mentioned earlier, I think for a lot of young people with very young children, the cost can be quite significant. It can be also something that may prevent a young person from wanting to get married, have children. Cost is a very important consideration. Of course, that's not the only reason why you get married, right? Cost shouldn't be the only factor, the joy of having children. I myself, at 62, I'm actually a father of two very young children. 7 and 9 now, but 8 and 10 very soon. So I understand what young people are going through in terms of cost pressure. I know the government is doing quite a bit already, without a doubt, and part of it is also a personal decision that, individuals and young couples have to take. But a bit more financial help may be useful, something to think about in terms of, boosting fertility rates, encouraging larger families, because cost of living in general is going up. Not all of us can see where it's headed. It may increase quite significantly. 30 years ago, 40 years ago when I was in school, things were a lot less expensive. But today it's different. Children are also living in a different environment where different expectations. Parents have different expectations. The world has changed. Expectations have changed. And I think we all want the best for our kids. And so clearly a bit of help in that area in terms of reducing cost.
Right, because one consideration for young people when they want to start a family is housing as well, right? And
That's
I
right.
think this year we have not really seen new housing measures, and there's all this chatter about how expensive houses are and how long people wait for their BTOs.
That's right.
So, do you think more measures could be introduced there?
Well, what's interesting to me is since December of 2021, the government has announced 4 sets of cooling measures. So they've done actually quite a lot in terms of, trying to cool the property market. It's not only the budget. In between budgets, they do announce measures. So, for example, in 2023, you had quite a lot of housing measures being announced by the government. Grants, CPF grants for first-time buyers of homes, either families or singles. They enhanced the CPF housing grant scheme quite a lot. I think, for individuals who are prepared to buy flexi homes where the leases are shorter, significant grants are also offered. So there are various schemes out there that can help young people to reduce costs. And this year, I think the government is, going to build something like about 20,000 built-to-order flats. And of that 20,000 flats, I think almost close to 4,000, or to be more precise, 3,008, will be built in a shorter time span of less than 3 years. And so that gives an opportunity for people who are in a hurry to get a flat to apply for those flats. And I think going forward, probably that percentage could increase so that more people can actually get a BTO flat faster, start a family faster, and grow their family faster. So I think the government is putting in effort. And what came through in Mr. Lawrence Wong's budget speech is that I think the government has already built something like about 89,000 flats between 2021 and 2024. Now, going forward from 2025 for the next 3 years, they're going to build another 50,000 BTO flats. So they've ramped up supply quite significantly. They're doing, I think, their utmost best in terms of trying to bring as many flats as possible into the market. So it's a multi-pronged approach, trying to cool the property market, at the same time trying to offer greater grants. Proximity grants were offered in the 2023 budget. So if you are staying near your parents or your parents are staying near you, you can actually get very significant grants. So some of these measures have been announced. Like even last year in August 2024, the government actually announced measures to cool the public housing market by changing the loan-to-value ratio. So we focus on the budget sometimes, but in between budgets, there are also other measures that come out that actually help individuals to purchase a home or help to cool the housing market. So we should not just focus on one single budget and say, look, the government is not doing enough. As I feel that, many of these budget measures are a continuum. they've been building up over the last 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. And the way the Singapore government works is they take a 5-year approach, 10-year approach, and some of these measures that they implemented 3 years ago, 5 years ago are still playing out. And I think they don't want to jump the gun and be too aggressive in announcing too many housing measures all in a go.
Okay, yeah, that's a really good point actually, right? That the budget is not just an isolated, standalone
Precisely,
thing.
it's a continuum. I feel it's a continuum, which is in keeping with the nature of this government, which is they take a planning approach, a strategic approach to policy. And their policies are never just to bring about improvements in 1 year. Many of the policies are intended to bring about changes, significant changes over the next 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. And politically, it's not an easy proposition to communicate to people. But I think, we should not lose sight of the overall picture, which is one that's relatively, I think, positive from a policy standpoint.
Okay, yeah. And speaking of housing, Shawn, I mean, for yourself, do you have housing concerns? And also at the time that you wanted to start a family, was housing an issue for you?
So at the time when I started my family, I was going to get married within 2 years after proposing to my wife. Hence, I didn't have a long waiting time to wait for a BTO. We did look at a sales of balanced land market, but unfortunately, there weren't suitable units available for us. Hence, making use of the resale housing grant from the HDB to purchase our first resale home. That's a HDB flat that came in handy. So I understand that the grants for that now has been increased to $80,000. So for those families who are not able to wait such a long waiting time for BTOs, they can then make use of this resale grant, hopefully to help out with reducing the cost of purchasing their first flat.
But also as your family grows or as your children grow bigger, right? I guess they will want more space as well. And sometimes people think of upgrading their homes. So is there something that you think about, and do you think that maybe some help is needed in that direction?
Sure. So, as Vasu has shared, the government has done a lot in this area of housing. In fact, BTO application rates numbers have stabilized. But I think there's one particular group, perhaps they could, receive some support in, future editions of budget. That would be the group that just fall outside the executive condo income ceiling.
Right.
So currently, for the executive condominiums income ceiling, it's set at $16,000 per month. For combined income for a couple. This change in income was last made in 2019. But if we looked at, the launch prices of ECs from 2021 till 2024, that's gone up by 24%. But, the income ceiling is still currently at $16,000 per month. And we look at a 3-bedroom of executive condominium these days could cost easily in a range of 1.5 million and upwards. So perhaps there's room for this income ceiling to be increased a little further.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's helpful as well, right? Because that benefits a whole range of people whose salaries are maybe like just above or just fall outside that. And I think there is another segment of people who say that they are not covered by the budget, and that is the young fresh grads who are like looking for jobs, for example, because all the skills future schemes sometimes are for those 40 and above, and I guess for the young low wage workers it's 30 and above. But there's this whole group of people in their early 20s maybe who are looking for a job and maybe have some issues in the job market, even if we do not have like high unemployment numbers, but sometimes they can be underemployed, for example, if they are in a job that is, not matching their education qualifications or their skill sets. So, I mean, Vasu and Shawn, do you have any ideas on that?
Well, I think some of these concerns are valid. There are some young people trying to look for jobs that they want. They may not be able to find a match. I think on the part of young people, what they can do, especially those who are in the university right now or who have just started university education, what they can do is also use the opportunity they have in the university to look for internship opportunities when they are studying. When you pursue internship opportunities, you get exposure and you also make friends and you create a network, which can come in very useful. So I've seen some of my friends, kids, for example, who have put in extra effort in terms of, looking for internship, looking for things that they really want. And they've also been lucky to some extent. They knocked on doors, been very persistent, got through the doors, done internship, put in the time. And, after a 3-4 year period, employer said, look, I'm glad you've done 4 years of internship that's relevant to the job that we're looking for. And so they get a break and they enter the market. So I think to some extent, young graduates can do that to help themselves. But beyond that as well, if you look at organizations like Workforce SG, which is under the Ministry of Manpower, they do offer career guidance, career counseling, workshops that highlight opportunities, even job seeker trials that, match, employers with those looking for jobs to see whether they work out. Because if they don't work out, then, they can both part ways as well. It's something perhaps the government can think about as well to develop, expand upon going forward to help perhaps guide many of these younger people in a bigger way. Because, yes, I think there are going to be lots of opportunities in Singapore going forward. We're going to have exciting times with AI, R&D, new industries building up. And I think young people also need some guidance as to, where they want to reskill, upskill, retrain themselves, and maybe even pursue education in those relevant areas, which is going to open up lots of opportunities. So I think it's a multi-pronged approach that, both the government and individuals have to take.
Do you think perhaps something more structured could be put into place, right? For example, like job placements, job matching, and internship opportunities in school?
I think that will be helpful. It is already taking place to some extent. In fact, many of the educational institutions have close relationship with industry players, like banks, like, the bank that I work for example, you have institutions actually sending their students to ask for internship, even looking out for job placements. So there are opportunities. I think, clearly this can be expanded upon and, a bit of government intervention in this area may be helpful. But it is already taking place. Maybe in a more structured way, as you said, in a more organized fashion, may be helpful.
Okay, and Shawn, I guess you've not graduated extremely long ago, but also not yesterday. So in terms of finding your first job,
Yes.
do you find any difficulties in that? And do you see that as a problem that maybe some help is needed?
I see. So I think one thing I did that really helped me was to learn about my strengths. I think what I would encourage a lot of people whom are either graduating or fresh out of school would be to discover their strengths. What are they most interested in doing? That can change over time, that's fine, but at the start, that's what they should be after. And that could be done through either personality tests. And I understand, many of the tertiary institutions offer career workshops for them to, understand more about their strengths. And then they should then, go forth and explore internships like what Vasu shared to see if that's a real fit for them.
We've been talking about how things change so fast now, right? I think there was some comment last week even about how sometimes when the young grads, when they graduate, they realize that the world is different from when they chose their courses 4 years ago. So some of the skills are already no longer relevant, or the skills they need has already changed, right? And that is quite scary, right? And thinking of the kids that you guys have, young children who will have to grow up in a world like that. Do you hope for certain things, like maybe in their education, even in primary and secondary school? Do you hope for more like hands-on learning, for example, that can prepare them even before they get to tertiary education?
Without doubt. I've got very young kids, as I said, and I think, the schools are already doing some of that. They are, encouraging the kids to explore different things, giving them different experiences. And of course, the parents themselves will have to play a part as well. Not just from an academic perspective, but from a holistic perspective. Maybe sports, enrichment classes, exposing them to AI and coding and cybersecurity and things that are going to be the in thing, 10 years, 20 years down the road. Many of the kids nowadays have a mind of their own as well. They are very exposed. Unlike my time when, information is quite limited, today information is abundant. So they will be exposed to lots of information. They'll have a mind of their own. And eventually, you've got to give them the space to grow as well. And as you said, some of the things that you study in university may no longer be relevant. But I think what you develop in university, which you will never lose, is a network. A bunch of people that you meet. And many of them will go into different parts of the economy and industries. And once you develop that network, I think that's a very valuable asset you should not underestimate. And the whole rigor, the process of education makes you think, the exposure you get. I think, again, you can take that to any industry, right? So I've got, in the banking industry, for example, I've seen doctors, lawyers doing extremely well. They were not trained to be in the banking industry, but they do extremely well. Because, I think the process of what they've gone through in university have made them a lot more resilient and they're prepared to explore and open up. And some of the skill sets they have in the process of learning to be a doctor have, actually made them quite valuable assets in the banking industry. So I think we should not box ourselves into a particular industry simply because we've pursued one particular course in the university.
Yeah, just so that's interesting, right? I guess it opens up the job hunting perspectives as well, right?
Indeed,
For fresh grads and people coming out
Keep
of
your minds
school.
open. The world is your oyster.
Okay, so my last question is, if you could speak to PM Wong right now, what would you tell him, Shawn?
Sure. I hope the government could look at the area of childcare leave. Currently, paid childcare leave is set at a maximum of 6 days if you have a child that is 6 and below. But we know that primary school going children, they are not independent yet, so that can be extended. For parents who have kids that are above the ages of 6, that would be wonderful. That 6 paid days of leave as well is also fixed at 6 days, no matter how many children you have. So if that could be tweaked, to cater, more leave for people who have, more children, I think that would be very beneficial as well, because, when a child becomes sick, it could be influenza or hand, foot, mouth disease. Easily you could wipe out the entire 6 days of childcare leave.
Okay.
So, I think Shawn said it so well. And I can relate to exactly what he's saying because I've got kids in the same category. And I think childcare leave is a good thing to have. I mean, a bit more childcare leave. I understand, of course, that also means that, you're taxing the organizations you work for. But I think the government has done quite a bit already. I mean, they've increased paternity leave from 2 weeks to 4 weeks non-mandatory. And in August of last year, PM Wong talked about making it mandatory, 4 weeks of paternal leave and allowing the mother to share her maternity leave with the husband. They've increased childcare leave for those below 2 years of age from 6 days to 12 days. But above 2 years old, as Shawn highlighted, it's still 6. The cost of raising a child can be significant because, these kids are growing up in different areas. They've got aspirations and all this add up. The cost of employing a helper, cost of tuition, enrichment classes, and then, of course, building up the reserves for their tertiary education all adds up. And so, more measures to provide more relief in terms of cost would also be helpful. But I must commend the government for having done a pretty good job in the last 3 years. I was looking at the budget before this podcast. I was looking at the budget in 2023, 2024, 2025. It's been building up quite nicely, right? It's been building up quite nicely. And hopefully the trajectory is one that's still northbound.
Okay. So for next year's budget, if there's one thing that you could ask for, for young people, what do you think that would be?
Young people with young kids.
Oh, it could be young, people in their first job, all the way up to young families.
Well, I would say perhaps giving them some kind of a boost in terms of putting a bit more money in the accounts. But perhaps this money is not for them to spend and cover costs, but this money is for them to build on and grow through investments over time. I think we need to nurture a greater investment culture among the younger generation. So the 5 billion, scheme that the government announced to boost the stock market is just the beginning. I'm not saying that, investors should put all their money into the Singapore equity market. I agree with Shawn that, you should keep a diversified portfolio. But this culture of investing, right, I think it's quite important. And even for my kids, when they become a bit older, I would create a small little pool of money for them I will work with them to invest in the markets, for them to understand the importance of investments, because I think in the longer term, that's a sure way to beat inflation and grow your wealth. And it's a very important part of their life journey. So, perhaps some amount that can be put into every young person's account that allows that person to invest and grow and incentivize for achieving certain targets and milestones.
That is very interesting. I've never heard of that before. Yeah.
Not a large amount. Enough to get them motivated to grow it. And, it should be centered around perhaps investments. And of course, this is just a very broad idea. How they go about investing the money, where they're going to get the resources to learn it. We got to think through the process. But I think my objective here is not just depending from budget to budget on payouts, on handouts, but rather to get everyone thinking more actively about managing their wealth, growing their wealth, beating inflation, because, you can actually take ownership of your destiny and come out victorious.
Wow. Okay. Okay, Shawn, how about you?
Well, I mentioned the area of childcare leave. That could be enhanced. I think that could be just a nudge I need, to consider having a third child or more. So that area would be most important to me.
Oh, wow. Okay, you heard it here first. This is what to do to get people to have their third child. Okay, well, that's a wrap for this episode of Headstart On Record. Thank you, Shawn. And thank you, Vasu. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Suen.
Thank you, Sen.
I'm Suen Tan. You can email us your thoughts on this issue or suggest another question you'd like to see me tackle next time on the show. You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn. And if you'd like to read my articles and the Headstart newsletter, all these links are in our podcast show notes. This podcast episode is edited by Amirul Karim. Stay tuned then. Thanks for listening.
Send your feedback to podcast@sph.com.sg. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or within our Straits Times app. Thanks for listening. Do note, all analyses, opinions, recommendations, and other information in this podcast are for general information purposes only and are not intended to be relied upon as financial advice. You should not rely on them in making any decision. Please consult a fully qualified financial advisor or professional expert for independent advice and verification. To the fullest extent permitted by law, SPH Media shall not be liable for any loss arising from the use of or reliance on any analyses, opinions, recommendations, and other information in this podcast. SPH Media accepts no responsibility or liability whatsoever that may result or arise from the products, services, or information of any third parties. All opinions expressed by participants in this podcast are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of SPH Media.